Former PM shadow still looms large over British politics, with Boris Johnson today giving his biggest hint yet that Downing Street hasn't seen the last of him. Delivering his final address outside the number 10 residence that he always dreamed of occupying, the ousted PM sent the rumour mill into overdrive with these comments.
Torch will finally be passed to a new Conservative leader. The baton will be handed over in what has unexpectedly turned out to be a relay race. They changed the rules halfway through, but never mind that now. Let me say that I am now like one of those booster rockets that has fulfilled its function, and I will now be gently re-entering the atmosphere and splashing down invisibly in some remote and obscure corner of the Pacific. And like Cincinnatus, I am returning to my plough.
Now, history lesson for you. Cincinnatus served as consul of Rome in 460 BC, then the highest office in the land. He later quit the city and went to live on a small farm, but returned to Rome as dictator some years later to guide the Republic through a turbulent period of war. So is this the clearest sign yet that Bojo plans on boomeranging back? Here now to analyse. Former advisor to Boris Johnson when he was London Mayor, Tory peer Lord Daniel Moylan. I mean, look, Lord Moylan, to me, this felt blatant. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Boris wants to come back, doesn't he?
No, I mean, first of all, you've got to understand Boris's sense of fun here. I mean, he just loves the idea that his last action is forcing the whole media of this country to refresh their Latin history, to make themselves familiar with the classics, to understand and talk freely about Cincinnatus.
Including me, by the way. I had absolutely no idea. I'm going to hold my hands up. I've done a history lesson today.
This is a man who has been promoting Latin and the history of Rome all his life, and here he is at the last moment, and he's forced you all to find out who Cincinnatus was. And the fact is, he lived about 500 years before Christ, 450 years before Christ. We know he was an historical figure, but part of it's legendary. We don't entirely know. But in Rome, if they had a real crisis, they could pick someone to be a dictator and run the whole show. And what's notable about Cincinnatus is that he was a landowner in the days when people still farmed their own land. He came out to be dictator, he solved the crisis, and then amazingly, after about a fortnight, he said, solve the crisis, I'm going back now to the plough. And he just handed back all the power. There's a story that he came back and did it again a couple of years later, and that's the point. But
because you must admit, Boris has not given up on his political ambitions, though, has he?
I don't want to say that. What I'd say, from my knowledge of Boris, is he's never a man who actually has sat down. Remember Michael Heseltine famously said he sat down at the age of 20-something and he plotted out his career right the way through to being Prime Minister, which he didn't make, but he almost made. And Boris has never been like that. He's always been a man for taking the opportunities as they arise. And he knows that sometimes they come and sometimes they don't. And he will be focusing now on refreshing himself, on resting. He'll probably start writing his memoirs. They all do, these prime ministers, and making some speeches and things like that over time. And he'll see what comes up. And then if there's a political opportunity, he'd look at that. But he knows there probably won't be a political opportunity. So I don't think he's somebody who's planning anything at all. He is a man who famously, when he was asked once, when he was mayor, do you want to be Prime Minister? He said, well, if the ball came loose from the scrum. And that's his attitude. If the ball comes loose from the scrum, whether it's being Prime Minister or something else, he'll pick it up and run with it. And if it doesn't, he won't.
He does feel, though, like he is the victim of a great anti-democratic injustice. Now, as it happens, I agree with that. There is a sense of anger and bitterness about what's gone on, isn't there?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think under the jocularity and the learning, you do just detect this tone that he hasn't been fairly dealt with. And that his achievements have not been properly recognised, and that he was the victim of a really vicious and sustained campaign, which was not about his policies. It wasn't even about parties. It was an attempt to toxify him personally by people who were never going to forgive him for delivering Brexit. And I think I always thought that was going to happen. I always thought that campaign would go on. I don't think he really was prepared for it. I think he expected that people would put it behind them. We've had a vote, we've made a decision, and now we move on together. That was, I thought, not going to happen. And I think he feels that it was a little bit unfair. But at the same time, life's full of unfair knocks, and Boris knows that. So the idea, I think, that he's going to sit there sort of, resenting it for the rest of his life, it'll be something that's there. But he'll get over that, and he'll think about the future.
OK, but final question, because putting Cincinnatus to one side,
Yeah.
we all know that in the same way that Liz Truss idolises Margaret Thatcher, Boris idolises Winston Churchill. And,
Yeah.
of course, Churchill felt like he was unfairly deposed, in this case by the British public, following World War II. Boris feels like he's been unfairly deposed by his own colleagues following the pandemic. Of course, Churchill did return to be Prime Minister.
Yeah, but I don't think there's any real parallel there, because Churchill stayed leader of the Conservative Party throughout, and throughout that period in opposition.
His party backed him in a way that they...
I think, what Churchill shows you, when you look at the breadth of Churchill's career, he's changed, twice he changed parties. He was in the wilderness for years when nobody wanted to listen to what he was saying about Hitler and warning about Hitler. He comes back. What he shows you is that life is full of ups and downs, and if you stick to your last and you've got the right message, there comes a time when people listen to you. And that, I think, is the closest thing you can say about Boris. I don't think you can look at any of these patterns and say, Churchill did this, Churchill did that, and Boris is along those lines. But I think the similarity is that Boris knows that life is full of ups and downs. It's full of opportunities. He's a tremendously optimistic person. Whether he comes back in politics or becomes, I don't know, the greatest tango dancer that the world has ever seen, it could be one of those two. It could be something else.
That is quite a thought, but having seen the wedding video where he does the little dance with Carrie Johnson...
He's obviously starting 1 foot forward
it's
only.
A long way to go.
A long way to go, but he could do that or something else. Who knows?
Foreign advisor to Boris Johnson, Tory peer, Lord Daniel Moylan, thank you so much.